Great Demon King, Chapter 32. Small Accomplishments in Magic. Shuo didn't immediately rest upon returning to the hotel's dilapidated storage room. Instead, he settled himself cross-legged on the floor, closed his eyes, and began practicing as usual. It was part of his daily routine, to refine the magical Yuan inside his body through the principles of demonic magic. He guided the magical Yuan methodically, letting it flow through his meridians, muscles, and bones. This continued circulation not only spurred the healing and strengthening of his body, but it honed his 5 senses as well. Bit by bit, he could feel his physical power grow and his perception sharpen, allowing him to see and hear things most people would miss. Encouraged by these palpable gains, Shuo set his sights on conquering the final bottleneck described in the Mystical Glacial Spellfire technique. Specifically, he needed to open the meridians in the tips of his fingers and channel magical Yuan into them. Doing so would allow him to manifest a spellfire in his palms, something that could become a formidable weapon. He focused his mind and began sending magical Yuan into both hands, imagining the energy splitting into 2 currents, one tinged with a faint red hue and the other with a faint purple. The deeper the Yuan penetrated his bone and muscle, the more intense the pain grew. It was as though the meridians in his fingers were being twisted and tugged beyond their limits. A dull, burning agony pulsed in his hands, but he gritted his teeth and held on, recalling the instructions. To fully master the glacial mystical spellfire, one must push through searing torment in the hands until the meridians in each finger have been unblocked. The agony felt endless. Beads of sweat trickled down his temples, and veins bulged across his face from the exertion. Every so often, his hands trembled uncontrollably, and he found himself on the edge of blacking out. Yet each time he faltered, he remembered that only by conquering this trial could he forge a genuine offensive technique, one that would grant him more than just physical brawn. At last, just as he thought the pain might become too much, he unleashed a sharp, ragged exhale and flicked his wrists with a muffled roar. Something within his fingers snapped, or unlocked. 10 crisp pop sounds echoed from his knuckles, and suddenly a flood of relief washed over him. Almost instinctively, the magical Yuan surged through his now cleared meridians, no longer meeting any resistance. Glancing down, he saw 10 faint blossoms of red-purple light ignite at his fingertips, like tiny candles winking into life. A mesmerizing glow pulsated there in the dark storeroom, illuminating his hands. Purple and red flames flickered and merged, shaped like petals around each finger. The glow was strangely hypnotic, giving him the sense of holding a cluster of arcane lights. He could see straight through the skin on his hands, as though his bones and veins had turned translucent. It was otherworldly. Triumph swelled in Shuo's chest. I did it. The mystical glacial spellfire had come to life in his hands at long last. He could feel power in the flames, albeit still somewhat weak, due to his relatively shallow reserves of magical Yuan. Yet even at this stage, he knew that if he struck an opponent with these clashing red and purple fires, the resulting damage, alternating between a fiery burn and an arctic freeze, would be lethal. In time, when his magical Yuan grew denser, he could compress these flames into his palms and unleash them with devastating force. Unable to suppress a low, victorious chuckle, he looked around the small room to ensure no one had noticed. Then, satisfied, he slowly drew the magical Yuan back into his body. One by one, the glimmering flames winked out, and his hands reverted to normal. Only then did his exhaustion catch up to him in a sudden wave. Feeling utterly drained, Shuo let his back sink against the wall, and sleep overcame him almost immediately. Early morning. A gentle chorus of bird calls outside pulled Shuo from slumber. He yawned, noticing with mild surprise that although fatigue lingered in his limbs, his mind felt unusually clear. Likely another beneficial side effect of his demonic cultivation. He gathered up his meager belongings and hastened to meet the rest of the group by the entrance to Droll, as Fanny had instructed the day before. The plan was to stock up on essential supplies, food, water, potions, before journeying deeper into the dark forest. "Come on, Brian. Stop dilly-dallying," Lisa muttered, hanging a bulging leather waterskin around his neck, and adding yet another heavy bag to his load. Between waterskins, bundles of rations, and various other items, Shuo was again transformed into a walking pack mule, trudging under the weight of their provisions. Even so, he tolerated it without complaint. He had, after all, grown used to hauling heavy items, and found that it offered another chance to strengthen his body. They soon reached the outer edge of Droll, which was already thronging with activity even at this early hour. Sloppy-eyed adventurers staggered out of taverns, Merchants rolled up their stalls from the night market, and small-time traders scurried about, hawking their wares or preparing caravans. Beyond the makeshift wooden palisade stood the vast expanse of the dark forest, its looming trees stretching toward the horizon like an endless green sea. "What were you doing in Master Fanny's room last night?" Lisa asked abruptly, eyeing him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She leaned in so as not to be overheard by the others. Han Shuo's gaze flicked toward Fanny, who was some distance away, instructing the other students on safety and dealing with possible magical creatures. He lowered his voice. "Master Fanny wanted me to help her practice some necromancy. She was testing, the bone arrow incantation and used me as a target." Lisa curled her lip, unconvinced. "What? That's something only novices need to work on. She's an adept necromancer. Why would she bother to test such a low-level spell?" Han Shuo kept his expression neutral. "She wanted to measure how different levels of bone arrow magic would function, I guess. Something about perfecting it for a new incantation. If you don't believe me, ask Master Fanny yourself," he said, putting on a casual shrug. From the slight scowl on Lisa's face, Han Shuo could tell she remained skeptical, but was reluctant to press further. Indeed, a woman's heart is complex. Even though Lisa only half-liked Han Shuo at best, she was clearly vexed at the prospect he might switch allegiances or become intimate with Fanny. Han Shuo recalled hearing that sometimes, once a girl knew you liked her, she'd behave as if you were her property, in a vague sense, even if she didn't necessarily want you for herself. It seemed to ring true here. "Fine," Lisa huffed at last, her eyes sliding away. "I guess you wouldn't dare lie to me anyway," she trailed off, then turned and hurried to catch up with the group. "Brian," came Fanny's voice from across the road. She waved him over impatiently, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. "Let's get moving. The dark forest terrain is uneven. It won't be safe to keep the horses with us. We're going on foot from here." He trotted up, shoulders bowed under his load. She gave him a brisk once-over and nodded. "Make sure you can keep pace. There are all kinds of dangerous creatures in there, so if you fall behind, we may not be able to rescue you in time." The note of coolness in her tone hinted that the aftermath of last night still weighed on her mind. Even so, there was a certain attention in her demeanor, as if she was unconsciously aware he was different from the typical errand slave. Perhaps it was a complicated mix of annoyance and curiosity. "Understood, Master Fanny," Han Shuo said, smiling. In truth, he was faintly pleased. This slight distancing felt like progress from her previous way of treating him as a worthless servant. Together, the group of 12 set forth beyond Droll's boundary. They meandered down a path leading into the dark forest, where trees arched overhead like natural vaults. Merchants and adventurers passed by in small clusters, many brandishing swords or staves, some with hulking backpacks of trade goods. Still others guided pack animals loaded with raw materials, presumably to be sold or bartered with the various races rumored to dwell in these untamed woods. Before long, the party reached a fork in the trail. They continued south at Fanny's instruction, while most of the other travelers branched off in different directions. After another stretch, they found themselves enveloped by dense foliage. Towering trees extended overhead, and thick shrubs formed a meandering labyrinth on the forest floor. Han Shuo marveled at the scale of it. He had heard the dark forest was expansive, but actually walking amid its towering trunks and enormous winding roots felt surreal. The deeper they went, the less human presence remained. A hush descended, broken only by the occasional bird cry or rustle of leaves in the wind. Suddenly, a faint series of rapid footsteps pricked at Han Shuo's hearing. Instinctively, he froze, tilting his head to listen. The sound was subtle but definitely present. Swift and light, definitely not human. "I hear something. Creatures approaching fast," he said lowly, glancing around warily. Bah! A novice necromancer who harbored a particular disdain for Han Shuo let out a snide laugh. "Oh please, you're just an errand boy. Quit pretending you can hear danger coming. Don't try to show off." Han Shuo said nothing further. He had grown used to such remarks. Instead, he tightened his grip on the straps of his load, keeping his senses alert. They proceeded another couple of minutes when Fanny's face abruptly shifted. "Something's moving this way. Magical creatures," she said in a hushed tone, raising a hand to halt the group. "Everyone, put down your packs and get ready. We may have to fight. We're still in the forest outskirts, so they shouldn't be too powerful. But don't let your guard down." At her command, the students hurriedly unstrapped their bags and crates, forming a ring with weapons and staves at the ready. Many of them glanced at Han Shuo with startled expressions, remembering that he had given the warning first. Bach swallowed and looked away, cheeks coloring with embarrassment. Han Shuo calmly crouched, letting his load rest on the ground. He flexed his fingers, wondering if he might put the bone arrow spell, or maybe even the weaker version of his demonic spellfire, to use if things got rough. He could feel his pulse jump with mild excitement. So begins my first real encounter in the dark forest, he thought, adrenaline coursing through him.